Sweet. So today we're going to be talking about what would you use Airtable ongoing support for? What are some use cases we see that customers come to us and they're like, could I use ongoing support for this? Could I use it for this? Because oftentimes we're scoping it into a project. So Kelly here, Director of Client Experience at Optimize, we're going to be talking about what do we see people using ongoing support for. So Kelly, if you want to give a real quick intro, we can jump into it.
Yep. Thanks, Ben. And I think this is a great topic. As Director of Client Experience, I think this is one of the things I talk with customers about the most, like what happens post-build. But I've been using Airtable since 2020. I worked at a publicly traded communications company, and I ran the security PMO team and built out project program, portfolio management, and all of the associated workflows that we needed for annual planning and such. I had that all in Airtable, really found the power of Airtable and how I was able to manage an extremely large team with it.
Yeah. So like you said, you have a lot of experience with Airtable support at these different companies. How do you see it now? How do you see like what questions are you getting? What are people wanting to use ongoing support for? What are you seeing now?
Yeah, I think when I'm talking with a newer client, especially if they're new to Airtable, when we talk through what the build process will be like, and then I always talk about ongoing support. And sometimes there's a question of why. And I think this talks truly to the value of Airtable is that one, when we're building, we always know 95% of the requirements. Clients that are newer to Airtable start uncovering the possibilities and they're going to want more, rightfully, as we build. But then also, let's just say it takes, 8-10 weeks to build out a very robust workflow. At the end of that process is when we're getting more end users in. And that's when there start to be questions for small little pieces of customization or, hey, if we had another dashboard that had this filter for this audience, can we get that built? Or even just some of the pieces that kind of come around once you have this great working function, whatever your function is, then it tends to expand a little bit into, well, hey, what if I brought that data in with an automation? And so there's so many different things that monthly maintenance can be used for. It's not just, maybe Zapier broke or, something's not working here. It's the growth of the software as the use cases tweak or expand.
Yeah. So I think if we jump into some of those examples, because that hits the nail on the head for me and what I see as well. A lot of times we'll create like some sort of an intake form for customers or for their extended user bases to request all these changes. But I was just showing one thing, like it could be as something as someone wanting like a color changed. Like I was just showing like just somebody wants the color change or they want a new dashboard, like Kelly was saying. So maybe it's adding new numbers to this dashboard or creating a brand new dashboard because it's for maybe a different stakeholder than this one is meant for. But I think that some of what I hear from different customers is they're happy to do these things, but over time there's so many of these things and it's just like not your day job to do these. And eventually there ends up being a queue of like 20 things that like different people want, and life happens, people get sucked back into their day job and it's just like ends up not being a priority. And then the Airtable systems fall out of place, or maybe somebody gets promoted into a different role and now these things are stuck here. Is that
Yeah, very
similar?
much. When my job was to manage the PMO team and use Airtable for it, but I would get questions like what you had of, where we had the three numbers, like, well, I want a fourth number, which sounds like 3 minutes of work,
Mm-hmm.
but maybe I have to create a new filter or you have to do, some of the back end work. And we all know context switching is hard and it makes us less useful throughout the day. So what I would almost do sometimes is like, when I was the internal Airtable champion, is like have my own list of people asking me for
Mm-hmm.
things. And I did have to prioritize them because my day job was to manage the PMO and make sure the projects and programs were going well. And then, secondary fun Friday afternoon stuff was building an Airtable. And I loved it. I just didn't have the bandwidth for it.
Yeah. I think that's what we hear that from a lot of people as well, is like they would love it if Airtable was their full-time job. Kelly gets the benefit. I think that was Kelly's dream for a little while, and now she gets to build things in Airtable all day long. Um, we won't plug that in this video. That if you want to as well, you could apply. But uh, yeah, I think those are some great use cases for Airtable support. I guess speaking back to like we support usually comes after we've done this implementation. What would you use support like? I think a lot of what we get is like, well, we built everything. It should just work, and I never have to talk to you again. Why is that maybe not always like the best way to think about it?
Well, one, again, the individual should be the expert in their day job and not always learning and knowing everything that Airtable has to offer. I think in one of our last videos, we were talking about building before interfaces.
Mm-hmm.
I see a lot of clients that they were building a couple years ago and just don't have the bandwidth to maybe investigate it, right? Like Airtable does fantastic sessions and demos and webinars, but to take the time to go and then see like what should I do with this? Does this apply to me? I
Mm-hmm.
think that's the job of the monthly maintenance owner. So when we're supplying that monthly maintenance or continued support, it's the expert that helped build, that understands what was built, not just from an Airtable perspective, but from a business perspective. And like, why is this company using this? And then when a new feature comes out, like, we have the 3 a.m. light bulb of, oh, here's who should use it and why. And then also how it should be rolled out.
Yeah, yeah. I think if I just think about like before somebody uses us as well, a lot of what we hear is people a lot of times like they push off starting an Airtable implementation because they want to feel like they have their entire process completely mapped out, and a lot of times that can like delay projects, and it is very like kind of sad to see because these people don't get the benefit of Airtable that they could have. But uh, and it works really well. A lot of times we start projects well before all the processes are figured out. So as we're building, a lot of times like on the business side, there it's their one of their first opportunities to redefine how some of these processes work. And so in doing that, I think during our implementation, we'll maybe implement it the best with the knowledge that we have during implementation, the best way that we think it should be built and the best user experience that we can possibly give. But then there's always these like things that are learned over time, and these processes are changing on the business side and the implementation. But then I I feel like processes are never like complete, or like they're never like, okay, this we're not ever changing this again.
I agree, and they shouldn't remain the same. I mean, like that's one of the things. Like we, should be getting more efficient, not really just for profitability, but to make things faster so that we can work on the important things. And we have like a lot of scenarios. Maybe a customer is using a couple tools, and it works, and they know their workflow, and we just want to consolidate to one. Like I would say that's sort of the easiest. But a lot of times, like what we find is that because there isn't a solution, people are doing things lots of ways. And then it's not just pulling that into Airtable. It's not just taking something that's, a manually updated spreadsheet and pulling it in Airtable. So it's a relational database with beautiful dashboards. It's, well, what is the approval process? Or when should we move from phase A to phase B? And that's why it's not just taking information and building. It's discussions and learning and figuring out where along the way is there an ability to have Airtable facilitate a process improvement, but like that understanding and that communication has to come from the customer too.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's perfect. So to wrap things up, could you give, I don't know, like maybe a synopsis of pulling it back to Airtable support, and why somebody would maybe choose to go with a partner like Optimize IS for the long term, not just for like an initial build. Uh, what are like your top maybe 3 or 4 use cases?
Yeah, I think the top is having someone to help expand Airtable. So if I'm the Airtable expert, and then now somebody's like, "Oh, I hear Airtable's great. Can you
Mm,
help me build?" No,
yep.
like there's just usually not bandwidth for it. So having a resource to build the extended use cases is number one. Number two is how process and workflows change over time, and being able to adjust for those, expand on the peripheral use cases, and make sure that we're delivering a complete solution that works for everyone. And then three is that resource that brings back, here's what's new at Airtable, here's things I think you should adopt, and
Mm,
here's how we should adopt it.
that's perfect. That's perfect. So I love that. In our next video, we're going to be going back in time. We're going to be looking before, typically before support happens, we're building out a project. And we're actually going to go like to the very beginning of a project and what you can expect in the first 2 weeks, or what you should expect in any Airtable project from anybody in the first 2 weeks, or like, let's say 25% of a project. So if you're interested in learning like what, if you were to work with somebody on building out your Airtable, let's say like a project management system from scratch, what should you expect and what would the timeline be to create that? I think the example we'll use is like 100-person team or 100 to 150-person team. So go check out the video here in the end screen, and we'll see you there. Thanks, Kelly.